Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. It started as static. Just a low hiss on the radio in the dispatch center around 2:17 a.m. Nothing unusual. That late, the town usually slept like it was drugged. Officers from Echo Unit 1 through 6 had already checked in from their beats. Routine patrols, quiet roads, drunk teens, and the occasional loose dog. But then came a crackle. Not unusual. What was unusual was the voice. Echo Unit 7 reporting status green.
Sector 9 secure.
Silence followed. The dispatch officer, Teresa Ling, blinked twice and stared at the console. There was no Echo Unit 7. There hadn't been for years. She knew this because she had started on the job the month after the incident. Echo Unit 7 had ceased operation after what was officially described as an internal personnel matter. Except the officers from that unit had never come back. Teresa hesitated. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had hacked the frequency. She double-checked the console. Signal trace, authentic. Origin point, Sector 9. Sector 9 hadn't been patrolled in over 5 years. She pressed the intercom. Echo Unit 7. Confirm your identity. Pause. Then the reply came, garbled but unmistakably human. Officer Jared Cole. Badge 1174. Everything's quiet tonight. Teresa's heart froze. Jared Cole was one of the 3 officers lost the night Echo 7 disappeared. His file was sealed, and internal memos were rumored to contain phrases like event timeline inconsistencies and temporal field anomalies, though those words were always redacted in official releases. And now he was reporting in. Teresa opened a direct line to Lieutenant Marquez. He arrived 10 minutes later, tired, skeptical. She replayed the recording. He turned pale. They sent a drone to Sector 9. It lost connection 5 minutes in. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same voice. Echo Unit 7 green status.
Sector 9 secure.
This time, he added, tell dispatch officer Ling looks tired. No one had said her name on the air. Teresa took leave the next morning. Stress, they said. Understandable. But the voice continued. Every night. 2:17 a.m. 3 nights in, a different dispatcher picked up. Echo Unit 7. Confirm location. There was a pause. Then, we've secured the gray house. It's breathing slower now. There was no gray house in official records. But old-timers in the department remembered whispers about a place that used to sit in Sector 9. Burned down, condemned, then somehow just forgotten. No one even knew what road led to it anymore. It had been replaced by forest, yet maps still showed it. Faint like a scar on paper. Week 2. The voice didn't just report in. It began giving updates. Movement detected by northern perimeter. Unseen entities, low threat. Request observation detail. Temporal distortion low tonight. Able to see moon clearly. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, nothing more than a highway loop before sunrise. Officer Brandon Wells had done this circuit for nearly a decade, and nothing ever changed. Long stretches of cracked asphalt, flickering yellow lane dividers, and the hum of white noise from the radio. But on this particular morning, something was off before he even left the station. When he walked to his cruiser, Unit 302, the trunk was open. Not wide open, just unlatched, barely noticeable. He frowned. It wasn't procedure to leave vehicles unsecured, especially not overnight. He closed the trunk and gave it a firm push until it clicked shut. The moment the latch locked, a strange chill ran through his spine. He blamed the early March air and got in the car. 23 minutes into his patrol, he was approaching a desolate stretch of Old Ridge Highway, the part locals called the Cut. For years, it had been the site of disappearances and strange animal sightings, but those were stories passed around coffee tables and bar counters, not in any official report. Still, he noticed himself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. At exactly 3:13 a.m., his onboard terminal pinged. A 911 call had come in, disconnected before the dispatcher could respond. The GPS ping showed the location to be on Old Ridge Highway, less than a mile from where he was. Standard protocol: investigate and report. As he slowed down, the cruiser's headlights swept across a white sedan parked awkwardly on the shoulder, partially in the ditch.
No hazard lights.
No damage, just sitting there with the driver's door open. He called it in. 302 on scene. Vehicle appears abandoned. No occupants in sight. He approached cautiously, flashlight sweeping the cabin. The keys were in the ignition, wallet in the cup holder, but no one in the car and no signs of a struggle. That's when he heard it. A knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, coming from the trunk. He froze. He called it in again. Possible person trapped in vehicle. Preparing to open trunk. His hand hovered over his holster as he reached with the other to lift the trunk lid. The moment it cracked open, just a sliver, he was hit with the overwhelming scent of wet soil and iron. And then, nothing. The trunk was empty. No person. No animal. Nothing. Just the faint outline of something having once been there. An imprint on the carpeted floor that didn't make sense. As if someone had been curled up inside, but reversed. The impression was concave, not convex, bending into itself like a vacuum pull. Then the radio cut to static. At first, he assumed it was interference. But then, beneath the static, came a voice, garbled but unmistakably human. "Let me out." He slammed the trunk shut and backed away. Every hair on his body stood upright. This wasn't a joke. There was no speaker.
No transmission glitch.
It had come from the cruiser's radio, but the tone was distorted, too low, too layered, like multiple voices stitched together. Brandon stepped away from the sedan and walked briskly back to his own car. He started the engine, ready to report back to dispatch and request backup. The dashboard screen glitched. Then his own trunk popped open. He stared at it in the rearview mirror. Open. Waiting. Before he could get out to check, the rear dashcam lit up. A figure, just for a second, leaning out of the trunk. Pale, emaciated. No hair. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, as though it had grown in the dark without room to stretch. But when he turned around, nothing. The trunk was shut again. And locked. The camera feed rewound itself. On its own. Over and over again, replaying the image of the figure. And then the screen went black. Brandon didn't report it. He returned to the station in silence, logged the incident as an unattended vehicle, and signed off early. He didn't tell anyone about the knocking, or the figure, or the voice. But the next morning, when Officer Daniels took Unit 302 out for patrol, he came back 2 hours later, white as a ghost. Said he heard tapping in the trunk the whole time. They opened it together. Empty. That day, they submitted a maintenance request for the cruiser. It was taken offline and reassigned for storage. But 2 weeks later, someone forgot and checked it back into service. The rookie who took it out was never seen again. All that was found was the cruiser, parked on Old Ridge Highway, trunk sealed, radio silent, and a single bloody handprint on the inside of the lid, pressing out. Not in. They destroyed the cruiser, burned it, buried the pieces, and shut down the highway. But officers still say, on quiet nights, they hear a knock. 3 times, from inside the trunk. And if you listen too closely, you might hear it answer back, "Let me in." At precisely 2:46 a.m., the County Dispatch Center received a 911 call from a landline registered to a foreclosed property on Hollis Creek Road. The voice on the line was unintelligible, distorted, wet-sounding breaths interrupted by a clicking noise, like teeth on glass. No words, just a slow exhale and the faint sound of something moving in the background. Wet fabric dragging across a wooden floor. The house had been abandoned for over 6 years. Standard protocol dictated sending a patrol unit to investigate. Officer Lenahan was closest. 15 years on the force, steady hands, no nonsense. He pulled into the overgrown driveway 12 minutes after the call came through. The grass was up to the windows. The porch sagged at the center, and the mailbox hung open like a mouth caught mid-sentence. His cruiser headlights caught the broken address numbers nailed to the siding. 287 Hollis Creek. He radioed in his arrival, stepped out, and immediately felt the weight. Not dread, not fear, just pressure. Like the air here was thicker, tired. The front door was unlocked. It always was. It had been boarded up twice by the city, but the boards never stayed long. Vandals, it was assumed, but no one ever claimed responsibility. Inside, the smell was impossible to place. Like wet paper and copper wiring, like the breath of something sleeping too long. Lenahan stepped through the foyer, noting the scuff marks on the hardwood floor. They were fresh, drag marks, not from furniture too narrow, like someone had been pulled. He called out. No response. The house absorbed the sound. Then came the click. The same one from the 911 call. A slow, deliberate tick, 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 echoing from somewhere upstairs. He unholstered his weapon and ascended the staircase. It groaned like it remembered being alive. The ticking grew louder at the end of the hallway, near the master bedroom. Lenahan pushed the door open. Nothing. Just an empty room. No furniture. Just dust motes swirling like flies in stagnant air. But on the floor sat an old rotary phone, one not listed in any dispatch inventory. Its receiver was off the hook, and the cord was plugged into the wall. But there was no phone line active in the house. The account had been deactivated years ago. He bent down slowly, careful not to touch it. There was moisture on the floor beneath it. Dicky, dark, not quite blood, not quite anything. He backed away, radioing in a request for follow-up and evidence collection. That's when the second 911 call came in. Same house, same number, same breathing, but Lenahan was still in the house. He checked his radio, confused. It wasn't his call. It had come through dispatch again, moments after his update. This time, the audio captured something new. A voice. One word. Drawn out. Guttural. Up. Lenahan froze. There was no up. He was on the top floor. Unless the attic. He turned toward the ceiling hatch above the hallway. It was closed, but dust trickled from the seams, like it had just been pulled shut. He stared at it for a long time. Dispatch called again, this time directly to his radio. Officer Matthews had been listening in. She asked if he was still on location. Lenahan responded yes, his voice quieter than he intended. Matthews was already en route. Then, a third call came through. Same house, same voice. This time, 2 words. Don't answer. The call ended mid-breath. Matthews arrived 17 minutes later. The front door was open. Lenahan's cruiser was still idling, driver's side door ajar. His flashlight lay in the foyer, flickering. He was gone. They searched the house, the property, the nearby creek. No signs, no struggle, no body. But in the attic, they found something strange. A mattress, a single child's shoe, and a phone different from the one in the bedroom. Older, covered in dust. But it was warm to the touch, like it had just been used. The house was locked up again. Police sealed it this time, pending investigation. Surveillance was placed at the property. The next night, the 911 line rang again. Same number, same location, same voice. Don't answer. They didn't, but the calls didn't stop. Over the next 7 months, 17 officers were dispatched to 287 Hollis Creek. Each one heard something different. Some heard crying. Some heard laughter. One officer swore she heard her own mother's voice asking her to come home. But no one ever stayed longer than 10 minutes. They stopped entering altogether after Officer Juno. She never made it inside. As she stepped onto the porch, she vomited. Not bile buttons. Hundreds of them. Old brass coat buttons, polished and wet. Her final words before they pulled her back? It wants me to call back. Eventually, the city shut off the road to the house. Surveillance was pulled. They listed the property as condemned. Utility records were erased. But the calls still come. Always at 2:46 a.m. Always from that number. The line is dead. Physically impossible to connect. But it rings. And sometimes, just sometimes, dispatch picks up. One night, a trainee answered without checking the caller ID. What she heard was unmistakable. Breathing, clicking, and then, faintly behind it all, the sound of a child's voice asking, "Can you come upstairs?" Officer Daniel Vance was known for his calm under pressure. 10 years on the force, no panic, no raised voice, never once fired his service weapon. The kind of officer people respected because they believed nothing rattled him. Until the feed. October 12, 2022. Routine call. Suspicious activity near an abandoned apartment block on Bellwether Street. The building had been unoccupied since a structural fire 10 years ago. No utilities, condemned. But locals insisted they'd seen flickering lights and movement in the windows at night. Vance went alone. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Dispatch logged his arrival at 10:43 p.m. His body cam turned on at 10:44, synchronized as always with his dashboard unit. The video began normally. Static crunch of boots on loose glass, the hushed creak of a rusted door. Then the feed blinked. Not a loss of signal. Not interference. A hard blink. One frame to the next, a full second gone. The first time, no one thought anything of it. Technical hiccups happen, especially in older buildings. But 5 minutes later, it happened again. And this time, something was different in the shot. In the first frame, Vance stood at the bottom of a stairwell, flashlight sweeping upward. In the next, he was still, frozen mid-step. But behind him, in the shadows, something had changed. A shape, human in outline but too tall, crooked, unmoving. It hadn't been there before. At the precinct, tech reviewed the footage. They assumed a visual glitch, pixel smear, data corruption. But when they enhanced the frames, the shape became clearer. A figure wearing a uniform, police issue, identical to Vance's, except the badge number, when zoomed, read 000. The timestamp, 10:53 p.m. 3 minutes later, Vance radioed dispatch in a whisper. "There's someone else in here." When asked to clarify, he paused. "He looks like me." At 10:57, the audio spiked with interference. Garbled voices, overlapping. Not a conversation, echoes. Snippets of phrases from old calls. from different voices. Some were Vance's, others were unidentifiable. One phrase stood out, heard distinctly, as if whispered right into the mic. "We never left." Then silence. The camera tilted, slowly, as if Vance was turning around in slow motion. But no footsteps were heard, just the shifting of fabric and the creak of the stair railing. When the view settled, the hallway was empty. Except it wasn't. The walls were moving, barely, a shimmer, like heat off pavement. But when frozen and zoomed, the shimmer formed faint impressions. Faces, dozens of them open-mouthed, blurred, screaming without sound. Vance never called in again. Backup arrived at 11:19 p.m. The building was searched. No trace of him, no damage, no sign of struggle. His cruiser was still outside, lights flashing. And yet, his body cam was back in the charger at the station. Inserted at exactly 11:42 p.m., 23 minutes after he vanished. Surveillance from the precinct shows no one entering the room. No one touching the charger. One frame, it's empty. The next, the device is slotted in, red light blinking. When examined, the body cam was warm, recently used, data intact. Except for one thing, the footage timecode was reversed. From 10:44 to 11:01, the video ran forward, then froze. And from 11:01 to 11:42, it ran backward. But there were no duplicated shots. The backward segment contained footage that hadn't been seen in the forward playback. Dark hallways, unfamiliar rooms, a child's voice humming a song never identified, a brief flash of what looked like a morgue drawer, door slightly ajar, with a uniform sleeve dangling out, badge glinting with the number 000. The department sealed the tape. Vance was listed as missing. No foul play suspected officially. Unofficially, something else happened. 3 weeks later, Officer Regina Holt was reviewing unrelated traffic cam footage from Bellwether. She paused on a shot, timestamped 2:13 a.m., 2 days after Vance disappeared. In the frame, someone was walking across the street, uniformed, same height and build as Vance, same slow gait, but the face wasn't right. When she zoomed in, the face was looking directly into the traffic cam, but the eyes were missing, just sockets, clean, empty black. She called it in. By the time supervisors arrived, the footage had glitched. That frame was gone, replaced by blank static, like it had never been there. That same night, Holt found a note taped to her locker.
No handwriting.
Just printed words. Badge 000 reports at midnight. She resigned 2 days later. An independent forensics analyst was brought in months later. He examined the body cam data, looking for signs of tampering. His conclusion: the footage was real. No evidence of edits, no corrupt metadata. But he noticed something strange in the audio waveform of the reverse segment, an embedded pattern. He isolated it, reversed it again, and slowed it down. The result was a voice, male, distorted but clear, speaking one sentence looped endlessly under the ambient sound. Every badge remembers. The department stopped investigating. Bellwether was demolished 6 months later.
No permits.
No media notice, just leveled overnight. But 2 weeks after the demolition, a maintenance worker at the precinct found something in the old evidence room, where Vance's body cam had been kept. A dusty locker, unmarked. Inside, a second body cam. Identical serial number. But it wasn't supposed to exist. Only one had ever been issued. The playback was static. Until 2:13 in. A hallway, cracked tile, a door creaking open, and then a voice, reporting in, then silence, until it blinked. A final frame, just text. Badge 001, you're next. It was supposed to be a routine welfare check. An anonymous tip had come in late Tuesday night. A girl, possibly 10 or 11, was seen alone, walking barefoot along the outskirts of an industrial park in Maine. It wasn't the kind of place children wandered into by accident. Cold wind, busted fences, rusted metal scrap yards. There were no houses for miles. Officer Mallory checked his GPS twice. No sign of her at first. He almost called it in as a false report until his headlights swept past a chain-link fence. And there she was, standing perfectly still behind it.
No shoes.
Dirty knees, hair covering her eyes. She didn't flinch as the patrol car rolled to a stop. She didn't run. She didn't wave. She just stared. Mallory rolled down the window halfway. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Are you hurt?" She didn't answer. He stepped out of the vehicle and called again, softer this time. "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm with the police. Do you live around here?" Still nothing. No expression, no sound. Just the wind moving her hair. He approached carefully. When he was 5 feet away, she looked up. Her eyes were deep green. Not unusual, but vivid in a way that felt deliberate, like they were meant to be remembered. Mallory offered her his coat. She didn't move. He wrapped it around her shoulders anyway, and that's when she finally spoke. "You're the fourth one," she said. He froze. "What do you mean?" "They always find me here. You won't be the last." Mallory called it in immediately. Dispatch confirmed no missing children in the area.
No matching descriptions.
Nothing in the system. They brought her to the station, tried to get a name. She gave none. Wouldn't speak unless spoken to. Just sat on the bench, holding her hands like she was praying. Eventually, child services arrived. That was supposed to be the end of it. But it wasn't. The next morning, Mallory came in early, curious to see if she was still there. Maybe she'd opened up. Maybe someone had come forward. The bench was empty. He checked the logs. No transfer was recorded. He asked dispatch, asked child services, asked the captain. Nobody knew where she went. There was no release paperwork. No footage of her leaving the station. It was like she had vanished from inside the building. Mallory pulled the footage from the patrol car dashcam. She had been there clear as day, sitting behind the fence, getting into his cruiser. He showed it to his captain. The captain frowned. "That's not the footage on the official report." They checked the station's internal server. The file had been overwritten. That's when Mallory decided to search the local police database for similar incidents. Children found under strange conditions. He didn't expect much, but there were 3 other entries over the past 9 years. Each one logged by a different officer. Each one referencing a young girl found near an industrial site. Each one disappearing within 24 hours. No records, no names, no follow-ups. One of the officers had since quit. One had been transferred. One was found dead in his apartment, suicide, they said. Mallory found the archived report from 2017. The name was redacted, but the notes weren't. The girl had told the officer, "You're the third one." Mallory remembered her exact words from the night before. "You're the fourth one." He reached out to the officer who had quit, Aaron Dunlap. Took a day, but Dunlap agreed to meet. They met in a diner 2 towns over. Dunlap looked hollow, uneasy. "She's not a person," Dunlap said. "Not really. I thought she was just a lost kid. But after she disappeared, things changed. I kept seeing her, at the end of the hallway in my building, in reflections that didn't match the room. Once on my couch, asleep like she lived there." Mallory asked the only question that made sense. "Why you?" "She finds officers," Dunlap said. Only ones who see her. She told me, "You're the third," like I was part of a chain. I tried to ignore it. But the nightmares. Dunlap stopped, swallowing hard. "She sits at the end of the bed and hums," he said. "Every night, until I left. I don't sleep anymore." Mallory left the diner shaken. That night he stayed up until 3 a.m., sitting on the couch, lights on, TV playing static. No sound, no movement, until the temperature dropped. Just a little, enough for his breath to fog. He turned, and there she was, standing in the hallway.
Nos shoes.
Green eyes, no expression. He blinked. She was gone. The next day he put in for medical leave. A month, maybe 2, but she didn't go away. 2 weeks later his doorbell rang. There was no one there, just a worn children's shoe sitting on the welcome mat. He brought it inside. Something about it felt familiar. He reviewed the dashcam footage again, the one he had backed up on a separate flash drive. Froze it at the moment she got into the car. He zoomed in. She was only wearing one shoe. The same one. It was impossible. He opened the evidence bag where he stored the shoe. It was gone. Just a note, folded inside. "You're the fourth one." Mallory's case files were erased the following month. His badge ID was flagged for sensitive access violation, and Internal Affairs suspended him without pay. They claimed he was trying to manipulate old records. He moved out of state soon after, and still, she waits. Cold pavement beneath her bare feet, watching the fences, waiting for the fifth. The call came in at 2:48 a.m., a routine disturbance at a convenience store just outside of town limits. Officer Darren Haynes was already nearing the end of a long night shift, the kind where minutes crawl and the radio hisses with nothing but static. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 1 more hour. Just 1 more hour and then he could go home. Dispatch gave the address. A gas station on County Route 8. Darren didn't remember seeing one there before, but he figured it must be new. This town changed fast when you weren't paying attention. He arrived 7 minutes later. The lot was empty. No lights, no signs of activity. The convenience store looked abandoned. Windows boarded up. Canopy lights over the pumps flickering faintly with a low electrical buzz. He keyed his mic. "Dispatch, I'm 10 to 23 at the location. No sign of disturbance. Place looks closed down. Static." He repeated himself. Still nothing. He got out of the cruiser, leaving the engine running. The air felt colder here, not temperature exactly. More like pressure. Something heavy pressing down on the lot. He knocked once on the door, then again louder. The door creaked open by itself. A single bulb flickered above the register counter inside. Shelves stood empty. Layers of dust coated the tile floor, disturbed only by a faint trail of muddy footprints leading from the doorway to the rear corridor behind the fridges. He called out. No response. His boots echoed through the empty aisles. Each step seemed to stretch out, reverberating longer than they should have. The rear hallway smelled faintly of ozone and something fouler underneath, like wet rust. He followed the footprints. They stopped in front of a door marked employees only. It was slightly ajar. A hum came from inside, mechanical like an old fridge struggling to keep running. He pushed it open slowly, hand resting on his holster. The room beyond wasn't a stockroom. It wasn't any room, really, just space. A massive space that couldn't exist in the building's layout. It stretched in all directions. Concrete floor, rows of unlit fluorescent lights overhead, and silence that pressed in on his ears. His radio crackled. Unit 12 report. The voice wasn't dispatch. It wasn't anyone he recognized. He keyed the mic. This is Officer Haynes. I'm at the location. Something's not right. I think I need. He paused. Ahead, under one of the lights, a figure stood facing away. Pale uniform, long black hair, no visible badge or patches. He called out. No response. He approached cautiously. 10 feet away, the figure twitched once, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, and turned around. It was him. The same face, same badge number, but the eyes were wrong. Empty, wide, and staring directly through him. The doppelganger raised its hand and pointed. Behind Darren, the door had disappeared. He turned back. Only endless gray space remained. He ran. No direction, just forward. Every aisle, every stretch of concrete identical to the last.
No exits. No windows.
Just more and more fluorescent lights, humming like flies. He tried the radio again. Silence. Then a whisper, barely audible. Still on duty. He spun around. Empty. His watch read 3:15 a.m., then 3:16, then 3:15 again. He tapped it. Still 3:15. He checked the cruiser dashboard when he retraced his steps hours later, or what he thought were hours. The clock blinked 3:15 a.m. again and again. The parking lot hadn't changed. Still empty. Still dark. He drove to the station, trying to shake off the dizziness clawing at the edge of his mind. Everything looked familiar but slightly off. The town square seemed older. The billboards advertised brands that hadn't existed in years. The front doors of the station opened automatically. No one was inside. Desks empty. Coffee half drunk. Computers still on, frozen on blank screens. He reached the briefing room. A whiteboard bore names of officers on shift. His was listed. Under active. Not on duty. Not scheduled. Just active. All caps. No date next to it. He tried calling home. The number was no longer in service. He tried his cell. No bars.
No battery indicator.
Just the time. 3:15 a.m. He searched every corner of the station until he found someone. A man in uniform, sitting at the far end of the evidence room, writing in a logbook. His face was turned away. Darren called out. The man didn't move. When Darren stepped closer, he saw that the figure was a mannequin in full uniform, except the chest bore a stitched-on name tag, Haynes, and the badge number was his. He pulled out the logbook. Every page was the same. Unit 12, 3:15 a.m., on patrol. Gas station on County Route 8. He flipped ahead. Hundreds of pages. The same entry. Over and over. His pen was on the table. Still warm. He backed out of the room. The station lights flickered, and for a moment the entire place was gone, replaced by that impossible concrete space from the back of the gas station. Then the lights returned. But he was in the cruiser now. Engine on. Headlights facing the boarded-up store. The radio crackled. Unit 12 report. His mouth opened, but he didn't speak. He simply stared into the dark storefront and waited. His watch ticked to 3:15 a.m. again, and again, and again, because for Darren Haynes, the shift never ended. Still hasn't. There was no official record of anything unusual ever happening in Cell 13. Located in the older wing of the Penrose County Sheriff's Station, it was just another holding room. Cold steel bars, a bench bolted to the floor, and a toilet that never flushed right. But officers avoided it. Not because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. Sergeant Bell was the first to log something, technically. A brief footnote in a shift report from 1996. Unexplained whispers heard from Cell 13, believed to be pipe noise. He never spoke about it again. Years later, he was found parked outside the station late at night, windows rolled down, just staring at the cell block. He retired a month after that without explanation. But the real escalation began in 2004. Officer Marla Ruiz had only been on the force for 9 months. She was assigned the night watch on Halloween, an uneventful evening until a teenager, high on something, was brought in for vandalism and locked in cell 13. He started yelling within minutes, not at her but at something behind her. His eyes never looked straight at the officers, only over their shoulders. Ruiz thought he was hallucinating until he screamed, "Tell it to stop saying my name," and then silence. Not the silence of someone calming down, but a vacuum. The kind where your skin prickles and your ears hum like something just left the room. They found him curled in the farthest corner of the cell, facing the wall. He wouldn't speak for 2 hours. When he finally did, all he said was, "It doesn't forget." He never explained who it was. The boy was transferred to county psychiatric and released 2 months later. He was never arrested again. The station kept cell 13 in use, but officers developed habits. Some wouldn't walk that hallway alone. Others turned off their body cams near the door. There were rumors about strange audio interference, soft breathing, static, or disembodied whispers captured just as an inmate crossed the threshold. But the most unnerving case happened in 2011. Deputy Thomas Leary, 41, worked the overnight processing unit. An older man, serious, skeptical, the kind of officer who hated ghost stories. One night, a vagrant was brought in, drunk, aggressive, muttering nonsense. The other cells were full, so Leary had no choice but to place him in 13. The moment the cell door closed, the man froze. He stopped moving entirely. Didn't sit, didn't blink. He stared directly at the wall, lips slightly parted, as if listening. Leary assumed he'd passed out with his eyes open. He turned to leave, but the vagrant suddenly whispered, "He's behind you." Leary spun. No one. He slammed the cell shut and stormed out. Later, reviewing the security feed, he noticed something strange. Right after the door closed, there was a 10-second gap of black screen. No error message, just absence. Like the camera feed had been erased, not interrupted. It resumed with the vagrant in the same position, but his shirt was torn, and a dark smear now streaked down the wall behind him. There was no explanation. No officer reported any injury, and forensics found no blood, at least not human. Leary wrote a full incident report. 2 days later, he withdrew it. His revised report simply said, "Detainee placed in cell 13. No irregularities." He never discussed the case again, but for the rest of his career, he refused to enter the cell block at night. He retired early, citing anxiety-related health issues. And then there's the sound. By 2014, officers noticed something else. An irregular pattern in the radio system. On the third Tuesday of every month, precisely at 3:13 a.m., dispatch would receive a single burst of static, always the same length, always from the internal receiver mounted above cell 13. Techs ran diagnostics, found nothing. They replaced the receiver. The anomaly continued. They shut off the power to that wing completely. At 3:13 a.m., the static still came, this time without any device transmitting it. Some tried to rationalize it. Electrical feedback, a prank, coincidence. But those who stood near cell 13 during the event reported something else. A whisper, barely audible, not random sounds, but syllables. A name, a phrase, never the same but always with intent. Something intelligent. One female officer, Shannon Myers, claimed she heard her own last name said backwards. She laughed it off. 3 days later, she swerved off the road while driving past the station. Her dashcam footage showed something inexplicable, her steering wheel turning by itself. The timestamp? 3:13 a.m. The station eventually stopped using cell 13. They didn't close it, they just ignored it. The door remains locked. No one cleans it. No one enters it. But the radio transmissions never stopped. In 2019, a paranormal research group petitioned the sheriff's office for access to cell 13. They were denied. Days later, one of the researchers, Emily Parks, posted a private video to her encrypted blog. She claimed she'd intercepted a shortwave signal using a modified police scanner. The signal came from within Penrose County and matched the timestamp of the known cell 13 static bursts. She played a short clip. It wasn't just whispering. It was layered voices, overlapping, gasping, some sobbing, others repeating phrases like, "Get out. It's not time. And he still lives here." The audio was removed 48 hours later. Emily Parks deleted her account and has not been heard from since. Her team claimed the video was fabricated for viral research. But in the months following the leak, a former Penrose officer, now in hospice, requested one final thing on his deathbed: to have his room locked at exactly 3:13 a.m. and to not let the man in the wall find me. His family thought it was morphine-induced confusion. But that night, a nurse on shift claimed she heard something outside the door. Not footsteps, just slow breathing. And then a whisper. The exact phrase was never repeated. Only that it ended with one word, 13, and then silence. It's been over 2 decades since anyone was willingly placed in cell 13. But officers still avoid that hallway. Radios still crackle once a month. And body cams still glitch only when facing that door. No one knows who or what first entered that cell. But something stayed. And it waits. The precinct logged it at 3:12 a.m. Patrol Unit 421 returned to the motor pool. Engine idling, headlights on, doors locked from the inside. Officer Darren Mallory had signed the vehicle out at 1847 the night before. He was never found. Initial review of traffic cameras showed nothing abnormal. Unit 421 cruised along its assigned zone for nearly 6 hours. Residential sectors, 2 routine stops, 1 welfare check. Dash cam footage showed Officer Mallory calmly sipping gas station coffee and flipping between radio channels. At 0:31, something changed. There's no clear trigger, no radio call, no distress in his voice. He's heard muttering. Then he pulls off onto an unlit county road marked as decommissioned since 2008. From this point forward, things no longer follow procedure. The car's GPS logs a destinationless route, 23 minutes of slow, deliberate movement. In the video, Mallory is speaking, but there's no one else in frame. He's answering questions, staring into the rearview mirror. At 0:59, he abruptly stops the car, leaves the engine running, and opens the rear door. Then he exits the vehicle, walks into the woods, and never comes back. At 1:03, something or someone gets into the front seat. The video cuts to static for 6 minutes. When the feed resumes, the vehicle is making a precise 3-point turn, like a trained officer would do during a tactical retreat. The department reviewed the footage over a dozen times. There was no sign of a second person. No silhouette, no footsteps, no shifting weight. And yet, the steering wheel turns. The gear shifter moves. The vehicle merges into the road and drives, perfectly, back to the precinct. The moment Patrol 421 pulls into the lot, the dash cam shuts off. The engine continues running until morning shift arrives. It takes the motor pool crew 15 minutes to unlock the car. When they do, the interior is ice cold, despite it being a warm spring night. Mallory's gear is all there. Duty belt, body cam, hat, untouched coffee in the cup holder. Only his radio is missing. An internal review followed. Some speculated that Officer Mallory had a mental health episode and walked into the woods voluntarily. Others insisted it was staged. But if he had abandoned his post, why did the car return? Why did it back into its space with such precise alignment that even veteran drivers commented on it? The most disturbing detail wasn't discovered until a full week later. Forensics ran a detailed sweep of the interior, dust, fibers, skin cells. What they found didn't belong to Mallory. In the back seat, someone or something had been riding for an extended time. Strands of hair, unidentifiable by DNA databases. Long, brittle, almost translucent, the fibers resisted standard classification, neither human nor synthetic. Chemical analysis showed a compound commonly found in embalming fluid. The vehicle was pulled from the rotation and placed into impound. But it didn't stay there. 3 nights later, Unit 421 was discovered on the road again, cruising a quiet neighborhood in Zone 4. The ignition was untouched, key fob missing, gas tank somehow full, despite being nearly empty when parked. It drove 3.7 miles, made a U-turn in front of a church where Mallory once responded to a noise complaint, and returned itself to the motor pool. After this incident, an officer was assigned to monitor the vehicle. A retired sergeant named Reeves volunteered, claiming he owed Mallory one. He spent the night in the passenger seat, video recording in hand. For 6 hours, nothing happened. But at 2:54, his footage captures the driver door unlocking. No hand, no key, just a soft click. And then, an inhaling sound like someone taking a slow breath right beside him. His camera falls sideways, and the remaining 23 minutes are filled with heavy breathing and distant whispering. Not from outside, but inside the cruiser. Reeves retired again the next morning. He refused to speak, left a note in his locker that simply read, "The car remembers. Patrol Car 421 has since been decommissioned. At least officially. But according to some rookies, it's still in the far corner of the lot, under a tarp that doesn't stay tied down. Some nights, when the wind is still, the radio in the squad room will flicker on, playing static for exactly 13 seconds. Always 13. And if you listen closely, there's a pattern, like breathing only backwards. No one talks about Officer Mallory anymore, but his name still shows up in the roll call logs, always at the bottom, always in faded print, as if the system can't quite forget him. They say the badge never leaves you, but sometimes it's the other way around. The small town of Merrow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business or thought they did. A sleepy crossroads with one main street, a diner, and an old gas station. It rarely saw anything out of the ordinary. But there was one thing that made every officer uneasy. One thing no one ever spoke about in the daylight. A stop sign. Not just any stop sign. It was the one at the intersection of Hollow Road and Pine Lane, standing crooked and rusted, its edges chipped like the jagged teeth of something long forgotten. To anyone driving through during the day, it was just another sign. But for the officers who patrolled those roads at night, it was something else entirely. It started about a year before Officer Jacobs was assigned to the night shift. Dispatch kept getting reports. Frantic calls about someone screaming near the stop sign. Not the usual distress calls about drunk drivers or petty fights. These were chilling, raw, wordless screams that froze the blood. People said it was a woman. Some swore it sounded like a child. No one ever got close enough to confirm. Jacobs was skeptical. As a city transplant, he chalked it up to overactive imaginations or maybe prank calls. But his first patrol near that intersection changed everything. That night, Jacobs cruised down Hollow Road just after midnight. The fog was thick, the kind that swallowed sound. As he approached Pine Lane, he saw the stop sign come into view, illuminated by his headlights. Then he heard it, a piercing, high-pitched scream slicing through the silence. He slammed the brakes and killed the engine, heart pounding. The scream stopped instantly. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Jacob stepped out, flashlight in hand, scanning the shadows along the tree line. Nothing. No movement, no sound. He radioed dispatch to report an unconfirmed disturbance. They told him no other calls in the area. That was the first time Jacobs heard the scream up close. But it wasn't the last. Over the next few weeks, the calls increased. More residents reported hearing the scream. Some even claimed to see a figure near the sign. A woman in tattered clothes, face obscured by shadows, standing silently in the fog. One night, 2 officers responded together. When they reached the stop sign, their radios began to crackle with static. Then, without warning, both radios went dead. In the dead silence that followed, the scream echoed again, this time directly behind them. They spun around but found only empty air. Both officers left that night shaken. Neither wanted to talk about what they experienced. But they agreed on one thing. The stop sign was more than just a piece of metal. Jacobs began researching the history of that intersection. The town records were sparse, but one detail caught his eye. 10 years prior, a young woman named Clara Dawson had died in a hit-and-run near that very stop sign. The driver was never found. Clara was known to take nightly walks to clear her head. Could the screams be hers? A restless spirit forever trapped at the spot where her life ended? Jacobs didn't believe in ghosts, but the evidence was mounting. The screams always stopped when someone approached. The figure vanished before anyone could get close. And the radios, those were the strangest part. Electronic devices failing near the sign suggested something beyond normal. One evening, determined to face the mystery, Jacobs set up a recording device near the sign. He stayed in his patrol car watching the road. Around midnight, the screaming started. But this time, it was layered with something new. Underneath the raw terror was a subtle rhythm, almost like a plea. Jacobs listened, entranced and horrified, as the scream faded into a whispered message. It was too faint to make out clearly, but it sounded like a name. The next morning, he played back the recording for the chief. The chief's face went pale when he heard it. "Did you hear that?" Saying, "Help me." Jacobs realized then that the stop sign wasn't just a marker on the road. It was a beacon, a signpost of pain and tragedy that refused to stay buried. Over the months, Jacobs and other officers tried different methods to quell the disturbances. Blessings from a local priest, removing the sign and replacing it with a new one. Nothing worked. Each time the new sign was installed, the screams returned. Then, one cold autumn night, Jacobs responded to a call for a missing child near Pine Lane. He searched the woods, flashlight sweeping through the mist. Suddenly, he heard the scream. It was close, desperate. Following the sound, he came face to face with the apparition. A young woman, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted in silent agony. Before he could react, she pointed at the ground. Digging there, Jacobs found a small, rusted locket buried beneath the dirt. Inside was a faded picture of Clara Dawson. Jacobs took the locket to the chief. It was a clue overlooked in the original investigation. They reopened the cold case and finally found the long-lost driver, now living quietly out of state. The mystery of the hit and run was solved, but the screams never stopped. That night, Jacobs returned to the stop sign alone. The screaming began, louder than ever. But this time he wasn't afraid. Holding the locket, he whispered, "We know. We remember." The scream dissolved into a sorrowful sigh. The figure appeared one last time, nodding slowly before fading into the mist. The stop sign still stands crooked at the intersection, But now, the nights are silent, except on rare occasions, when the fog rolls in thick and the wind carries a faint, mournful whisper, a reminder that some stories never truly end. It was the kind of quiet night that settles over a small town when the weight of silence feels heavier than any sound. Officer Daniels had just started his late shift, cruising through the dimly lit streets in his patrol car. Calls had been sparse, almost non-existent, leaving him to the hum of the radio and the occasional rustling of dry leaves skittering across the asphalt. Then the call came through, a domestic disturbance, just a few blocks away. The dispatcher's voice was calm but steady, the kind of professional calm that masked the tension beneath. Daniels flicked on his siren and sped toward the address. When he arrived, the house was dark except for a faint flicker of light from an upstairs window. No movement was visible from the street, but the dispatcher's report had said there was shouting and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Daniels approached cautiously, hand hovering near his radio, fingers tight on the door handle. Inside, the air was thick with a stale, metallic scent that didn't quite fit with the typical chaos of a domestic call. The furniture was untouched, no signs of forced entry or overturned objects. But the walls echoed faint whispers, soft, indistinct, almost like voices carried just beyond the edge of hearing. Daniels called for backup, his voice steady but tinged with unease. Minutes passed, but the radio stayed silent. No crackle, no response. He tried again, urgency creeping in. Still nothing. The radio's static hissed and then was abruptly gone, leaving an eerie void. A chill crept over Daniel's skin as he moved deeper into the house, flashlight piercing the darkness. Up the stairs, a door creaked open on its own. He stepped inside, the beam catching the figure of a man standing motionless, facing the window. His clothes were torn, eyes vacant. The man turned slowly, mouth opening in a silent scream. Daniels reached for his radio one last time. "Backup? Please respond." Only silence. Then the voice came, soft, cold, right beside his ear. "We're already here." The phrase haunted Daniels long after he left the house. The dispatch logs showed the call had been received, and backup units were en route. But no other officers had been dispatched. The radio was dead for the entire night. When the house was searched again, there was no sign of the man Daniels saw. The neighbors denied hearing any disturbance. The dispatcher had no record of any unusual transmissions. The unsettling truth began to emerge in whispers among the force. Stories from other officers hinted at similar calls. Times when backup never came because something unseen was already waiting, watching, and answering in the silence. Daniels never spoke of what he heard that night, but sometimes, when the radio crackles to life unexpectedly, he hears that voice again. We're already here. Behind the surface of this story lies a deeper, psychological horror. The idea that help might already be present, yet not in any form we expect, taps into primal fears of isolation and the unknown. It flips the usual assurance of backup and safety on its head, suggesting that sometimes the threat is internal, hidden within the very system designed to protect. The silence in the radio is not just technical failure. It becomes a metaphor for the invisible dangers lurking within familiar structures. When Daniels' calls for help go unanswered, it's not because help is delayed. It's because help is already on the scene, but not in a comforting way. This creates an unnerving tension between presence and absence, protection and menace. What does it mean when those who should be allies become indistinguishable from the threat? The phrase "we're already here" challenges the listener to question reality and authority, evoking the fear that the lines between friend and foe can blur into something unrecognizable. It began with the footsteps, not the usual echo of boots on concrete, but something lighter, almost hesitant. At first, they were easy to dismiss. The station was old, creaky, and the basement was a labyrinth of pipes and storage rooms. Late-night officers often joked about ghost patrols down there. But when the footsteps started matching the rhythm of a slow walk, deliberate, pacing, and coming from an empty corridor with no one assigned to that area, the jokes stopped. Officer Jenkins was the first to mention it. The night was otherwise routine. He was doing rounds, checking the locks on the basement doors. That's when he heard them. Soft steps behind the metal filing cabinets, coming closer, then retreating. He spun around. Nothing, just shadows stretched by the flickering fluorescent light overhead. He called out, no response. At first, it was a mystery. A rat? Maybe a maintenance worker? But the timing was always the same, just past midnight. That's when the station was quietest, and only the night shift remained. More officers began hearing the footsteps. Sergeant Mills swore he even saw a shadow dart past a stairwell landing camera. But when they checked the footage, there was nothing unusual. No figure, no disturbance. Just static, briefly. What unsettled them more than the footsteps was how they seemed to respond. If an officer stopped and waited, the footsteps would halt too. If they moved forward, the footsteps would retreat, always just out of sight. It was like the sound itself was alive, playing a game. One night, Officer Ramirez decided to investigate. She took a flashlight and descended the stairs alone. As she reached the basement landing, the footsteps began. They were slow, deliberate, a calm, measured pace, walking toward her from the far end of the hallway. She held her breath, tightening her grip on the flashlight. The steps paused. Silence. Then, right beside her, a whisper, so faint she could barely catch it. Help! Her heart jumped. She spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark, but no one was there. Only the cold concrete walls, the faint hum of the station's old ventilation system, and the unsteady pulse of her own breathing. The next day, Ramirez found an old station logbook stored in the basement archives. It detailed a grim event from decades ago. A janitor named Harold, who had been found dead in the basement. Official cause, heart attack. But the entries around that date told a different story. Complaints from officers about strange noises, misplaced keys, and lights flickering in the basement. Harold was rumored to have been a quiet man, devoted to his work, but often lonely. He spent most nights cleaning the basement, the very place the footsteps now haunted. Could the footsteps be his? A restless echo of a man tied to a place he loved? Or a warning? The mystery deepened when a security officer reviewed the old station blueprints. There was a small, sealed-off maintenance tunnel under the basement, forgotten by everyone. No one knew why it had been closed, a place no one entered in years. Curiosity and dread collided when the night shift was asked to check the tunnel during their rounds. Inside the narrow tunnel, the air was thick with dust and an unshakable chill. Walls lined with rusted pipes dripped slow drops of water. Then, from deep within, the unmistakable sound. Footsteps. Slow, echoing off the concrete. The team moved forward, flashlights barely piercing the gloom. No sign of anyone. No source for the footsteps. Just the feeling of being watched. One officer's radio crackled with static. Then a faint voice whispered, "Leave." No one dared stay long. From that night on, the footsteps didn't just appear in the main basement hallway. They came from the tunnel as well. Sometimes they were accompanied by a faint scent of old tobacco and the faint sound of a mop swishing on the floor, like a man still cleaning long after he was gone. Officers tried to rationalize, exhausted minds conjuring phantom sounds, but no one could explain the cold spots, the inexplicable power surges, or the feeling that someone, or something, was always just behind them in the dark. One evening, a rookie officer, skeptical of the stories, decided to spend the night alone in the basement. He set up his camera, determined to catch the ghost or expose it as nonsense. Hours passed in silence. Then the footsteps began. Soft, pacing, growing closer. He whispered into his radio, "I hear it, coming this way." The footsteps stopped. Then, a whisper, barely audible, "Don't come down." The camera flickered, static surged, then cut out. The next morning, the rookie was found outside the station entrance, shaken and unable to explain how he got there. His camera was broken beyond repair. Since then, no one dares to investigate alone. The footsteps remain, a chilling reminder that some places hold onto their secrets, and sometimes they refuse to let go. They say some things are better left forgotten, erased, even wiped clean, like a mistake no one wants to acknowledge. In police work, evidence is sacred. Every detail preserved, every recording carefully cataloged. But sometimes the evidence doesn't want to be found. The night it happened, Detective Harris was finishing up his final interview with a suspect in a string of mysterious disappearances. The interview room was cold, sterile, the kind of place where every word feels heavier than it should. The suspect, a quiet man named Gregory Mills, sat motionless. His eyes, oddly calm, watched Harris like a predator sizing up its prey. The tape recorder sat on the table between them, its red light blinking steadily, recording every sound, every hesitation. Harris started the questioning routine, methodical and patient. He asked about Gregory's whereabouts the nights the victims vanished, about his connections, his habits. Gregory answered calmly, almost rehearsed. Nothing unusual. Yet, there was an undercurrent, something just beyond the surface, an unspoken tension that set the air on edge. As the interview progressed, Gregory's demeanor shifted subtly. His eyes darkened, voice lowered. He spoke about the disappearances, but not as a witness or suspect. More like someone who knew something no one else did, something hidden beneath the layers of the ordinary world. "You ever wonder," Gregory said quietly, "if the real story isn't the one we're chasing? If the shadows hide more than just criminals?" Harris felt a chill but kept his composure. He pressed on, trying to pin down a motive or slip-up. But Gregory's answers grew more cryptic, his calmness unsettling. "Sometimes," Gregory said, "the tape lies." That phrase lingered in Harris's mind long after the interview ended. When Harris left the room, the tape recorder continued its soft blinking, a steady pulse of recorded truth. Back in the precinct, Harris placed the tape in the evidence locker. But something nagged at him, a vague unease he couldn't shake. The next day, he returned to review the recording. The moment he pressed play, the room grew inexplicably cold. The tape hissed at first, static filling the silence. Then came the voices. Gregory's voice was there, calm and measured, but the answers felt off, as if the words twisted just slightly, warped into something else entirely. Harris leaned closer. He noticed strange gaps, like the tape had been cut and spliced, but there was no sign of tampering. Then the recording abruptly stopped. The tape hissed again and played silence. Confused, Harris rewound and played it again. Same result. The part of the interview where Gregory said, "The tape lies," was completely missing. Frustrated, Harris checked the recorder itself. No glitches, no error messages. The file should have been intact. But it wasn't. Over the following days, Harris reviewed the tape repeatedly. The missing segment expanded each time he listened, swallowing more of the interview until only faint whispers remained. and then the whispers stopped too. Harris's colleagues joked about a haunted tape, but he wasn't laughing. There was something deeply wrong, like the tape was alive, erasing what it didn't want anyone to know. Determined to get answers, Harris sought out the original manufacturer of the recorder, a model known for its durability and reliability. The technician tested the device thoroughly, but found no faults. No mechanical or electrical issues, the technician said. It's like the tape itself is corrupted. The word corrupted felt too simple. Then came the strange phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, layered with static and a cold tone that seemed to crawl under Harris's skin. "Stop looking," it whispered. "Some stories aren't meant to be heard." The call ended abruptly. Harris tried to report the call but found no records of it in the logs. No number, no trace. Unease settled deep. Then, a second tape arrived in the evidence locker, unmarked, untraceable. Harris found it late one night, wedged between other files. On it was a single word scrawled in black marker, "Listen." Against his better judgment, Harris played the tape. Static again, but beneath it, faint breathing. Then a whisper. "Why do you keep trying to remember what should be forgotten?" The voice was Gregory's, but the words didn't come from the tape recorder's speaker alone. The temperature in the room dropped. Harris's breath fogged the glass. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls, as if the room itself was speaking, warning. Suddenly, the tape sputtered and played a new segment. It was the missing part of the original interview. Only this time, Gregory was confessing to something else entirely. But the confession was wrong. It spoke of crimes that never happened, locations that didn't exist, names that weren't real. The tape played on, a twisted story bending reality. Harris tried to stop it, but the controls were unresponsive. The tape rewound on its own and started again, the lies embedding deeper with each replay. His hands trembled. His mind raced. Had the tape been tampered with? Or had Gregory said something so dangerous it refused to be remembered? Harris decided to confront Gregory once more. He found the suspect in his holding cell, alone and silent. Gregory looked up, a faint smile curling. "You can't unhear the lies, detective," he said softly. "The tape just balances the truth." "Balance what?" Harris demanded. "The part you see and the part you don't." Gregory's smile faded as guards came to escort him away. That night, Harris returned to the precinct and checked the evidence locker. The original tape was gone. No sign it had ever existed. The second tape also vanished. The only thing left was a faint whisper in the silence. A warning, or a promise, that some stories don't just hide in shadows. They erase the shadows themselves. Sometimes, the places that aren't meant to exist are the ones we stumble into when we least expect it. This story begins on a chilly autumn night, with Officer Mark Harrison responding to a call that seemed routine. A stranded motorist in a remote area on the outskirts of town. The dispatcher had only given him a vague location, a stretch of highway just beyond the county line. Mark, a veteran of 8 years, knew the area well, or so he thought. His cruiser's headlights cut through the thick fog that had rolled in early that evening, the kind that clings to the ground and swallows everything beyond a few feet. His radio was mostly silent, save for the occasional crackle of distant chatter from other units. As Mark drove, he noticed the familiar landmarks slowly fading behind him. The highway markers became less frequent. The trees grew taller, denser. The road surface beneath his tires changed from asphalt to cracked concrete. He glanced down at his GPS and then at the old paper map on the passenger seat. The GPS was glitching, signal lost. The paper map ended just miles back. The road ahead appeared as nothing but a thin, unmarked line on the edge of the map's margin. That was odd. The call he had received was for a disabled vehicle stranded just off Route 217. But the road he was on didn't match any known routes in that region. It was unnamed, unmarked, unregistered. Mark's instincts tightened. He reached for his radio, attempting to call dispatch. Dispatch! This is Officer Harrison. Do you copy? Static. No response. He tried again. The radio buzzed, but no one answered. The stillness was unsettling. In the faint glow of his dashboard lights, Mark's eyes caught movement up ahead, shadows shifting between the trees lining the road. He slowed down but saw nothing concrete. No animals, no pedestrians. The night seemed to press inward. Then, through the fog, Mark saw a figure standing beside the road. A woman, pale, wearing a long coat, her back turned. He pulled over cautiously. "Mom? Are you okay? Need help?" The woman didn't respond. She didn't even turn around. Mark stepped out into the damp air, boots crunching on cracked pavement. "Mom." Still silent. He moved closer, the hairs on his neck standing up. When he reached her, she finally turned, face obscured by shadow. But before Mark could say a word, the woman suddenly vanished. No sound, no trace, just gone. His heart rate spiked. Shaking it off as a trick of the fog, he returned to his cruiser and tried to restart the radio. Nothing. No signal. No call.
No GPS.
Only the road ahead, stretching endlessly into the darkness. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The road sign beside him wasn't weathered or rusted. It looked brand new, and the name on the sign wasn't any road he recognized. It read, Haven Road. Mark frowned. Haven Road wasn't on any official maps. Not county, not state, not federal. He pulled out his phone to check. No data, no signal, only the eerie silence pressing down. He decided to drive forward, hoping to find the stranded motorist or some sign of civilization. As he continued, the road narrowed. The trees closed in tighter, branches scraping the sides of his cruiser like fingernails on a chalkboard. The fog thickened. The temperature dropped sharply. His breath came out in misty puffs. Then, just as he was about to radio dispatch again, the headlights caught something in the distance. A single, flickering light, like a lantern. Mark's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he approached. The light came from a small cabin set back from the road. The windows were dark and empty, yet the lantern's glow seemed to float just outside the porch. He pulled over and stepped out. Silence. The air smelled damp and old wood, but also something else. A faint metallic tang that unsettled him. Mark walked toward the porch. The lantern's flame flickered as if disturbed by a breath, though the air was still. He tried the door. Locked. He checked the windows. Empty. Not a single sound. No wildlife, no breeze, no life. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He turned back to his cruiser and noticed fresh tire marks in the dirt nearby. Recent tracks heading further down the road. Against his better judgment, Mark followed them. The road twisted unnaturally now, and the fog was so thick he could barely see the headlights reflecting off the pavement. Then suddenly the road ended, not in a curve or a junction, but a sheer drop-off into darkness. Below was an abyss, a void that seemed to absorb every light and sound. He edged closer to the end, peering over the edge. Nothing. No bottom. No ground. Just black. His radio crackled briefly and then went silent again. Mark's pulse pounded. Then, through the crackle, he thought he heard a whisper, a voice barely audible, calling his name. Mark! Mark! He whipped around. Nothing. Only the fog and trees. A chill ran through him. He sprinted back to the cruiser, locked the doors, and tried the ignition. No response. The engine sputtered, then died. He was trapped. He looked around desperately. That's when he noticed the road signs again. There were more now. Signs that weren't there before, all pointing back the way he came. Except the names were different. Names of places that didn't exist. Names that made no sense. Return. Don't stay. Leave. Mark swallowed hard. The whispers returned, growing louder. Mark! Don't look back. He forced his eyes away and pressed the gas. The cruiser lurched forward, but the road seemed to stretch on forever, twisting into shapes that defied logic. Time warped. Minutes passed like hours, hours like seconds. Suddenly, the radio buzzed loudly.
Dispatch, come in.
Officer Harrison, do you copy? Mark barely breathed. Dispatch, this is Officer Harrison. I'm lost. I don't know where I am. The voice on the other end was static, then, get off Haven Road. You're not meant to be there. The line went dead. The fog lifted suddenly, revealing the familiar trees of the county line. Mark's cruiser started as if nothing had happened. He sped toward the last known intersection, the weight of the night pressing down like a nightmare he couldn't shake. Later, when Mark returned to the station, he looked up Haven Road. Nothing. No record.
No construcción permits.
No reports of any road by that name. The only official explanation was that the road didn't exist. But Mark knew better. There was a place beyond the maps. A place that was never meant to be found. A road not drawn. A boundary not crossed. Where time loops and whispers call. And sometimes, when the fog is thick and the night is silent, someone like Mark might wander in, and never come back the same. The evidence bag was sealed tight, a transparent plastic barrier between the world and the chilling secrets it held. What was inside wasn't unusual at first glance, a simple, everyday item. But it was the handprint on the inside of the bag that turned this case into something no officer wanted to talk about. It began on a cold November night. Officer Daniels had been called to a rundown apartment on the edge of the city after a neighbor reported screams. When Daniels arrived, the building was eerily silent except for a faint tapping noise from somewhere inside. The door to apartment 302 was ajar, hanging loose on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with a mixture of dust and something metallic. On the cracked linoleum floor lay an overturned chair, a shattered picture frame, and a single crumpled note. But what caught Daniel's eye was a small wooden box, an antique jewelry case, lying face down near the window. As he reached to pick it up, a cold shiver crawled up his spine. There was no one else in the apartment. No sign of forced entry, no footprints except his own, no fingerprints other than the faint smudge on the box's surface. But Daniels noticed something else. The wooden box was damp, almost sticky to the touch. He placed it carefully into an evidence bag and sealed it. Back at the station, the forensic team began their usual analysis. The box was old but well-crafted. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, lay a delicate silver locket. Nothing out of the ordinary, except the locket was warm, almost pulsing, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. The officers assigned to the case reported hearing faint tapping noises coming from their lockers, even when they knew they were alone. Files related to the apartment started to disappear and reappear in odd places. The most disturbing detail came when the evidence bag containing the wooden box was opened for a routine inspection. There, imprinted on the inside of the plastic, was a distinct handprint. It wasn't the usual dusty smudge or accidental fingerprint. This was a full, clear handprint, as if someone had pressed their palm firmly against the inside of the bag. And it was wet, even though the bag had been sealed the entire time. Nobody claimed responsibility. None of the officers handling the evidence could explain it. The handprint was too large to be Daniel's, and the pattern was unusual. Instead of normal skin lines, the print seemed almost blurred at the edges, as if the hand had been in motion when it pressed down, or was only partially there. Questions piled up. How could a handprint appear inside a sealed bag? How could it be wet? Forensics confirmed no tampering. The bag had never been opened since Daniels first sealed it. The story spread quietly through the precinct. Some dismissed it as a prank, others as a bizarre fluke of static electricity or condensation. But a few officers refused to be so dismissive. They spoke of the apartment's history, an old building marked by disappearances and strange occurrences, dating back decades. The most chilling detail came from a report buried in the archives. A previous occupant of apartment 302, a woman named Evelyn Carter, had vanished without a trace 30 years earlier. Her belongings were left untouched, and the case went cold. But locals whispered about Evelyn's obsession with the supernatural. Seances, spirit boards, and messages from the beyond. Some theorized that the wooden box was a conduit, a vessel for something lingering from Evelyn's disappearance. The warm locket inside seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if holding a restless spirit. Then the tapping started again, this time in the evidence room itself. Officers on night shift heard soft knocks against the steel lockers, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent. Some reported feeling cold drafts and fleeting shadows at the edges of their vision. One night, Officer Morales stayed late to guard the evidence. As the clock ticked past midnight, the tapping started beneath the floorboards. Morales swore he saw a pale handprint appear briefly on the glass of the evidence cabinet, then fade like smoke. Shaken, Morales removed the bag with the wooden box and decided to examine it alone. As he unzipped the evidence bag, the air grew heavy. The locket's warmth intensified until it felt almost burning. Morales heard a faint whisper, a soft voice calling his name, laced with sorrow and anger. He dropped the box and the locket rolled open. Inside was a tiny, faded photograph of Evelyn Carter, her eyes hollow and haunted. Morales tried to close the bag, but the handprint reappeared instantly, dark and wet. It seemed to reach toward him, desperate, pleading. The next morning, Morales was found in the break room, pale and shaking, unable to speak of what he had seen. He requested leave and never returned to the evidence room. The wooden box was locked away in a vault, sealed tighter than ever. Yet the handprint never fully disappeared. It would sometimes appear, faint but unmistakable, on the inside of the plastic, as if something trapped inside was still trying to reach out. The case file remains open, but no one dares to touch the box anymore. Some officers claim the handprint is a warning. Others believe it is a sign of unfinished business, a soul bound to the earthly plane by trauma and mystery. And the locket? It still pulses, like a heartbeat frozen in time, a silent reminder that some evidence carries more than just physical proof. It carries the imprint of the unknown. It started with a simple call, a routine dispatch, nothing unusual on the surface. But sometimes, it's the quiet ones that carry the weight of something far darker. The police station where it all happened was an old building, a relic from the early 20th century, tucked away in a small town that had seen better days. The dispatch room was cramped, with aging equipment that still hummed with a faint static, like a heartbeat struggling to stay alive. Officers joked it was haunted, but most laughed it off. Everyone knew the legend. A dispatcher named Mary Collins who died in 1983, right in that very room. The official story was a heart attack during her shift. Nothing more, but some of the older cops believed otherwise. Fast forward to present day. The department replaced much of its tech, but the dispatch room was untouched, preserved like a shrine. New dispatchers often felt an eerie chill when working the graveyard shift. Phones would ring with no one on the line. Radios crackled with faint voices that didn't belong to any known officer. A deep silence would sometimes fall, broken only by a faint tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. One night, a rookie dispatcher named Jenna took her first overnight shift alone. She was eager, a little nervous but confident she could handle it. Shortly after midnight, her radio buzzed with an incoming call. The voice on the other end was faint, distorted by static, but clearly female. "Emergency. Please, help," the voice whispered, barely audible. Jenna leaned forward, trying to make out the words. "This is dispatch. Please state your emergency." No response. Then suddenly the call cut out. The radio went dead. Jenna checked the system. No active calls.
No dispatch requests.
Minutes later, the call returned. Same voice. Same whisper. "Help me." Jenna's heart raced. She pulled up the logs for the caller's number. Nothing.
No trace.
Not even a phone line registered to that number. She tried to trace the call, but every attempt hit a dead end. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Jenna shivered, rubbing her arms as if to shake off the growing unease. Suddenly, the dispatch screen flickered. Lines of old code and garbled text flashed across it before the screen returned to normal. Jenna blinked, unsure if she'd imagined it. Then came the tapping, soft at first like a distant knock, then louder, right on the window beside her desk. Jenna froze. No one was outside. The parking lot was empty. The night was still. She told herself it was just branches against the glass, or perhaps a rat. But the tapping continued, rhythmic, deliberate. Then the radio crackled again. "Mary!" The voice was clearer now, distinct. The name hung in the air like a warning. Jenna's hands trembled as she grabbed the mic. "Mary who?" Silence. Then, the radio exploded with static, filling the room with a high-pitched screech. Jenna dropped the mic and covered her ears, desperate for the noise to stop. When the static finally faded, the room was deathly silent. Her screen blinked once more, and a single line appeared. 1983. Jenna's breath hitched. Her eyes darted to a small plaque on the wall, faded but readable. "In memory of Mary Collins, dispatcher, 1955 to 1983. The year matched. Heart pounding. Jenna reached for the phone to call her sergeant. The line was dead. The radios went dark. Then, in the quiet, a final whisper. "Help me." Mary Collins wasn't just a dispatcher who died quietly during her shift. Rumors said she had uncovered something dangerous, the kind of truth that didn't want to be heard, that lingers in the shadows, desperate to reach out even decades later. Jenna never spoke about that night. She left the department shortly after, citing personal reasons. But the legend only grew. New dispatchers who work the graveyard shift sometimes report hearing a soft voice pleading for help. Some say the spirit of Mary Collins still tries to complete her last call. A call for help that never came. And sometimes, when the radios burst into static for no reason, or when the dispatch screen flashes the year 1983, the old-timers just nod quietly, knowing some calls echo beyond death. It started on a quiet Thursday night, an ordinary shift for Officer Daniels, the kind where the hours drag slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. The precinct was unusually still, a calm that settled deep into the bones of the station like a quiet warning. Then, just after midnight, the silent alarm on the far side of town began to beep. A silent alarm isn't like the regular siren blaring in the street. It's subtle, designed to alert police quietly, so they can arrive before any intruder knows help is on the way. But this alarm was different. It kept triggering over and over at exactly 3-minute intervals. No matter how many times Daniels checked the address, nothing was wrong. No forced entry, no broken windows, no signs of disturbance. His radio crackled with dispatch, but even the dispatcher seemed puzzled. No units near the location, nothing reported on the street. But the alarm's persistence was undeniable. Every 3 minutes, beep, silent, insistent. Daniels drove out to the address, a small, unassuming townhouse on Elm Street. The street was empty, bathed in the harsh glow of street lamps casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks. The house sat dark, no sign of life. The front door was locked tight, no footprints in the dust outside. He circled the perimeter, his flashlight slicing through the night, looking for anything out of place. Inside, the house was empty. Dust coated every surface like a frozen moment in time. The alarm panel blinked quietly. No error codes, no indication why it kept triggering. He called in for backup, his voice tight with unease. But even when 2 more officers arrived, the alarm continued to ring out in its quiet pattern, unyielding. That's when Daniels noticed it. The faintest sound beneath the beeping, a whisper. Not over the radio, not from any device, but from somewhere inside the house itself. At first, he thought it was his own imagination. But the whisper grew louder, taking shape like words just out of reach. The officers moved carefully through the house. The whispering seemed to follow them, shifting from room to room like a restless breath. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with it, a sound that didn't belong. In the living room, Daniels found a cracked photograph on the floor. It was a family portrait, aged and faded. The eyes of the people in the photo seemed to catch the flashlight's beam, staring back with hollow emptiness. Suddenly, the whisper became clearer, forming words that echoed softly, "Help us!" A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. He checked the alarm panel again. This time, the silent alarm stopped beeping. But the house had fallen into an oppressive silence heavier than any darkness. Then, the lights flickered on their own, illuminating a single message scrawled across the bathroom mirror in condensation. "Not safe." The officers exchanged nervous glances. Daniels felt the weight of something watching from the shadows. Something tethered to the house, trapped in the space between now and then. The back door creaked open suddenly. No one had touched it. Daniel's flashlight swung toward the sound, catching a glimpse of a pale figure standing in the backyard. But as he blinked, it vanished. When backup arrived at dawn, the alarm was silent. No signs of forced entry, no intruders, nothing. The house was just an empty shell once more. But Daniels never forgot the whispering, the message on the mirror, or the feeling that something beyond understanding had reached out through that silent alarm. An unseen cry from a darkness that refused to be ignored. The call came through just before midnight, a time when most officers had settled into the calm rhythm of their shift. The dispatcher, a veteran named Lisa, had heard her share of strange calls, but this one made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, an officer reporting an incident. That was nothing unusual. What unsettled Lisa was the call sign. Unit 47, requesting immediate backup, the voice said. Unit 47 had been retired years ago. The officer who used that call sign had left the force over a decade ago under mysterious circumstances. Everyone knew the story, but no one talked about it much. The kind of thing that lingered just at the edge of memory, like a shadow in a quiet room. Lisa's fingers hovered over the radio controls. She double-checked the caller ID. The transmission had come from a squad car parked at the edge of Maplewood Forest, a place with a reputation for strange disappearances. Lisa's heart quickened. Protocol demanded she send help, but every instinct screamed hesitation. How could someone retired still be on patrol? Or was it something else entirely? The call continued, voice steady but strained. I'm at the intersection near the old Miller's farm. Something's wrong here. I need backup, and I need it fast. Lisa glanced at the timestamp, 3:13 a.m. The same time the retired officer had vanished years ago. She keyed the radio. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Please confirm your identity. No response. Lisa tried again. Voice steady. Unit 47, do you copy? Static. The dispatcher checked the squad car registry for the area. No active units matching that call sign. No one was out there but her and now whatever was using that frequency. Her mind raced through the possibilities. A prank? A malfunction? Or something darker? Suddenly, the radio crackled. Backup is en route, the voice said, low and distant. But Lisa hadn't dispatched anyone. The voice whispered, "Don't come alone." She froze. Her eyes darted to the monitors. The camera feed covering the edge of Maplewood Forest flickered, then went dark. Minutes passed like hours. Then a third transmission came, garbled, desperate. "They're here. They're watching. If you don't send help, no one else will." Lisa's hands trembled. She alerted the nearest patrols, but when officers arrived at the location, they found an empty road and a single abandoned squad car, lights still blinking faintly. No sign of Unit 47. No signs of struggle. Just silence. The radio frequency had gone dead. In the days that followed, Lisa learned something chilling. The officer who had been Unit 47 wasn't just retired. He had disappeared exactly at that time, years ago, after responding to a call from the same area. Officially, he was presumed missing in the line of duty. But now that call was coming again. Some say the forest never lets go. Others whisper that Unit 47 still patrols the edge of Maplewood, caught between worlds, reaching out for help no one can hear. And the call that came from an officer long retired, remains one of the coldest mysteries in the department's history. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes it calls for you. It began on an ordinary night shift, just past midnight, when Officer Daniels took over the holding cell watch. The station was quieter than usual, only a handful of detainees, nothing out of the ordinary. One of them was a man arrested for disturbing the peace. He was cooperative, quiet, almost too calm. But something about his eyes unsettled Daniels from the start. They weren't just dark or tired. They glowed faintly red under the dim fluorescent lights. At first, Daniels assumed it was a trick of the shadows, maybe the man's eyes reflecting the harsh bulbs. But every time Daniels glanced at him, those eyes seemed to burn a little brighter. Not in anger, not with menace, but with a cold, unnatural intensity that seemed to pierce straight through him. Throughout the evening, the man sat on the bench in the corner, silent, barely moving. Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes were watching not just him, but everything else. Every corner of the station, every shadow behind every door. Then the other detainees started complaining. They said the man's eyes glowed red when they looked at him, and it made them feel sick. One inmate, a middle-aged man arrested for drunk driving, swore that the red eyes whispered to him in a voice only he could hear. The whispers promised things no sane person would want. Daniels dismissed the complaints as paranoia. Stress and fear tend to play tricks on the mind, especially in the cold sterility of a holding cell. But even he couldn't deny that unease was settling over the entire wing like a creeping fog. Hours passed. Daniels continued his rounds, checking IDs, logging entries, but his eyes kept drifting back to the man. The red glow seemed to flicker, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dim light. Suddenly, the radio crackled. Unit 3, we have a disturbance in the cell block. Daniels grabbed his flashlight and headed to the cell. The man was gone. The bench was empty. No signs of struggle. No open doors. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Panicked, Daniels checked the surveillance monitors. The cameras showed only static in the cell. They cut out for a full 7 minutes, then returned to normal, but with no sign of the man. As Daniels stared at the screen, the static flickered again, and something appeared. A pair of red eyes, staring back at him from the black and white fuzz. He blinked, but the eyes remained. Back in the cell, the other detainees were frantic. They claimed the man's presence was still felt. They said they heard footsteps pacing the corridor when no one was there, doors slamming without cause, and a low humming sound that filled the air. Daniels called for backup and tried to maintain order. But as the night wore on, more strange things happened. Officers on duty reported cold spots near the cell block, a chill that seeped into their bones despite the summer heat outside. Security doors locked and unlocked by themselves. And the red eyes, they appeared again and again, sometimes peering through the small windows of the holding cell doors, sometimes glowing faintly at the end of the hallway. No one could explain it. The station's tech team reviewed the camera footage carefully and discovered something chilling. Every time the red eyes appeared on camera, nearby electronics glitch and short circuit, radios lose signal, lights flicker, and the station's internal systems reboot without warning. The more Daniels tried to find logical explanations, the more the mystery deepened. He started digging into the man's background, hoping to find clues. But no records existed. No previous arrests, no ID, no fingerprints. Even stranger, the name the man gave during booking returned no hits in any database. It was as if he had appeared from nowhere. Then came the reports from other officers. Strange dreams, nightmares filled with the same red eyes watching them from the darkness. Some reported waking up drenched in sweat, feeling cold hands gripping their arms. One veteran detective who'd been on the force for decades said the red eyes reminded him of an old legend. A tale passed down in whispers about a spirit that haunts police stations where unresolved cases linger, feeding on guilt and fear. Daniels didn't believe in ghosts, but that night he wasn't so sure. Late into the early morning, Daniels volunteered for a solo watch in the cell block again. As the minutes ticked by, the silence grew heavier, more oppressive. The lights flickered, the temperature dropped. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Daniels saw it. The red eyes, glowing brighter than ever, staring at him from the shadow of an empty cell. He turned sharply. No one was there, but the faint scent of smoke and something metallic lingered in the air. Suddenly, his radio crackled one last time, barely a whisper, but clear enough to send a shiver down his spine. "Don't look away." The lights went out. Daniels was left alone in the darkness, with nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the echo of those red eyes burning in the shadows. There's a moment in every police officer's career when the line between reality and something else, something unexplainable, blurs. It's a fleeting second, a glance, a feeling that sends a chill down the spine. This story is one of those moments. It's about a man who was arrested, right in front of an officer's eyes, and then vanished, completely.
No trace, no explanation.
Just gone. It happened on a cold autumn evening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant rain. Officer Daniels was on patrol in a quiet suburban neighborhood when a call came in about a disturbance. Someone reported a man acting erratically near a local park. When Daniels arrived, he found a man pacing near the swings, his movements jerky, almost frantic. The man's eyes darted wildly, and he seemed unaware of Daniels' presence at first. "Sir," Daniels said calmly, "I need you to step away from the playground. Can you tell me what's going on?" The man didn't answer but turned toward the officer with a sudden, sharp glare. There was something off. His gaze was too intense, too hollow. Daniels could feel it in his gut, that something wasn't right. He reached for his handcuffs and calmly told the man he was under arrest for disturbing the peace and erratic behavior. The man didn't resist, surprisingly. He raised his hands slowly, and Daniels clipped the cuffs around his wrists. But as soon as the cuffs clicked shut, the air shifted. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a quiet, almost imperceptible hum filled the space between them. Daniels started to lead the man toward his patrol car when, suddenly, the man stopped mid-step. His eyes fixed on a point just behind Daniels, and his body stiffened like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. "Something wrong?" Daniels asked, turning slightly. But before he could fully face him, the man blinked once, and then simply disappeared. No sound.
No struggle.
No sign of movement. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. Daniels spun around, eyes scanning the dimly lit park, searching for any sign of the man. Nothing. No footprints, no scuff marks, no disturbance in the leaves or grass. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The radio crackled to life, and a dispatcher's voice cut through the silence. "Officer Daniels, are you okay? You were on the line." His hand trembled as he responded. "Subject vanished." "I repeat, subject vanished mid-arrest. Request immediate backup." Backup arrived within minutes, and the area was swept thoroughly. K-9 units, additional patrols, even a drone was deployed to scan the surroundings. But no trace of the man was ever found. The witnesses who initially called it in were questioned again, but no one else saw anything unusual beyond the man's erratic behavior. To them, he had simply walked away, blending into the night. Daniels' report became an anomaly in the precinct. The official paperwork noted the disappearance as unexplained, a placeholder phrase that barely scratched the surface of what had actually occurred. Days passed, and Daniels couldn't shake the image of the man's hollow eyes, the sudden chill, and that humming sound, the hum that seemed to linger in his ears long after the event. He began to question what he had seen, doubting his own senses, wondering if the stress had gotten to him. But then strange things started happening. His patrol car's radio would randomly emit that same low hum during quiet nights. Sometimes, just out of the corner of his eye, Daniels caught glimpses of a shadowy figure standing just beyond streetlights or disappearing when looked at directly. The feeling of being watched became a constant companion on his shifts. One evening, as he reviewed the case files, Daniels noticed something unsettling. An old case from decades ago, nearly forgotten, described a similar incident. A man who had been arrested on the same street for the same kind of disturbance who also vanished without a trace. The case was closed as a missing person, but no leads ever emerged. The deeper Daniels delved, the more he realized this wasn't a random event. Something was tied to that spot, to those arrests, to the vanished men. Something that fed on the vulnerability of those caught between worlds, between law, order, and the shadows lurking just out of reach. What haunted Daniels most was the growing certainty that this man who vanished mid-arrest wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. And somewhere, beyond the veil of everyday reality, that chilling hum still echoed, a warning and a promise.